Okay, so we're going to look at cascading if statements to validate a form. But first we're going to do a picture and some pseudocode. So I'm going to have a form with 3 text fields that need to be validated, and once I validate them, I'm going to do some processing. So I'm just going to call them, for my pseudocode, field 1, 2, and 3. And when I click the button, I'll have an on click, and the first thing I'm going to do is validate. So when I click my submit button, I'll do if try parse. So for pseudocode, I'm just going to say if parse1. Okay, if parse1 is successful, if it works, then I'm going to go on and say if parse2. So if 1 parse is okay, then I'll go ahead and parse2. And if 2 parse is okay, then I'll go ahead and try and parse3. And if I had more fields, I'd have a deeper nested if statement. And now that I've parsed 3, if that's successful, so if I get in here, then this is all 3 passed, and I can do my processing. So do all processing for this form here. Okay, now, so all of my processing is complete by the time I get to here. So whatever it is I'm doing with those input fields. Now I have an else. So if parse3 is successful, everything's been successful, I've done all my processing. If parse3 is not successful, I have to handle that error. So handle error for 3. If I got this far, that means 1 and 2 were successful, but 3 failed, so I only have to handle a problem with 3. Okay, and I come down and I do the matching else for parse2. So if parse2 is successful, I went on and did this stuff. If it failed, then I'm in this else clause, which means I have to handle error for the second field, for 2, right? This is 2 is the green, 3 is the brown if statement. Okay, and then I have also a matching else for parse1. So if parse1 fails, if there's an error in this first field, I'm in this else clause. So this is going to be handle error for field 1, or text box 1, whatever you want to call it. And then my end if. Okay, so let's look at that in code now. So here I have a simple form. I have 3 text boxes. I have 3 labels that are just going to be used for giving error messages if the validation fails. And this label here is output. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to enter 3 numbers, and I'll sum them up and take their average and put that in the output. It could really be any processing though. The idea is we want to validate 3 fields and then do some processing. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the code. So for the click event for the submit button, well, let's first look on form load. I set up, I empty some strings and whatnot. But on the click event, I want to first have a couple of numbers. So I'm going to enter local variables. So I'm going to have a local variable as an integer for each of the fields, and if I wanted to allow the user to enter doubles, I'd use doubles. Okay, and then I'm going to start parsing and validating those, and I'm simply going to check for a valid integer. So I'll use if integer try parse. Now the text box is txt in 1, and the text field is .text. So that's the string that I'm going to try and parse, and num1 is the buffer that I will put the result in if I'm successful. Okay, so if I'm successful parsing that first one, then I'm going to go ahead and try and parse the second one. Move that down a bit. So first I try and parse the first one. If I'm successful, I go ahead and parse the second one. And if that works, then I go ahead and try and parse the third one. Okay? So if all three of those parse okay, then I do my my processing. Okay, so in this case, what that means is I sum up the three fields, and then I divide that by 3 and get the average, and I put it in my output label. So it's whatever processing, though, that needs to be done for your particular application. So what I'm trying to highlight here is the nested if statements. First I validate the first. In this case, all validation means is try parse, but it might be more than that. If there was a number range or something, then that would be included in the validation too. So first I validate the first one. If that succeeds, I validate the second. If that succeeds, I validate the third, and so on. Once everything has succeeded, then I do all my processing, and now I have to build these else statements, which are the flip side. So the flip side of if it succeeded is if it failed. Okay, so in this case, this first one, the most deeply nested is field 3. So if field 3 succeeds, I do this, else I do this. So I set up my message. I say that's not a valid number. I set the focus on that field, and then I do this select all so that the text is selected. Okay. So that's handle field 3. Now I do the else. Now notice this else lines up with field 2. And I'm just going to cut and paste. It's going to be exactly the same, only for text box 2 instead of 3. So I'll go through and change each of these to be 2. Okay. Okay, there my formatting's fixed up. I just was missing a few end if statements. So notice I have my first if to validate the first text box. If that's successful, I go right away to an if to validate the second, and then the third. And once everything's validated in these nested if statements, in this middle section here, I can do all of my processing. And then I have else statements to handle the failure, the possibility of failure of each if statement. So this first else is lines up with this last if. So I handle error in label 3. The next else, and then that ends that if statement. So you can see they all line up. The formatting helps with that. Then I have my next else is related to this if statement, and you can see they're lined up, and if I click on that, they'll line up. So this else handles a failure in the second if statement. And then this else at the very bottom, the last else, is the one that relates to the first if statement. It handles an error in that first one. So I can go ahead and run the program now. And if I have all numbers and press submit, it works. And if I have an error, then I get an error message, and that works. Now, if I put a number back in, notice the error message doesn't go away because I haven't handled cleaning that up yet. And that's what we're going to do next. Just to get rid of that error message, once it's fixed, I want to add that to the success part of the true part of the if statement. Okay, so I'm going to do if the first field parses successfully, I'll clear the message string for the first field, clear the error message because it worked. This passed my validation, so it must no longer have an error. And once I clear the error message, I do my second validation, validate the second field, and again I will clear that error message if it validates successfully. And then I'll go on and process my third, and the first thing I'll do is clear the error message for the third field if that processed successfully. Okay, so just to sum it up now, what I do is for each field that I have to validate, I have an if statement. If validate, in this case validate means try parse, so I try and parse the text into an integer. If that's successful, then I clear any error message that might have been set for that field in the past, and I go on and try and parse or try and validate the next field, and the next, and the next, and the next, and once they're all validated, then I can do whatever processing is needed for that form. And then I have to put in these else statements. So the else clause contains the error handling for the associated validation. So in this case, the first else clause is if there was a mistake in the third validation. Okay, and now let's have a look. And you can see this time I can put numbers in and it works. And if I put some letters in, now interestingly, because of the way I'm doing it, I'm only validating one at a time. I'll fix this and then go on to the next one, fix that one. It clears the error messages as they get fixed, and the next error message pops up, and then when they're all done, all the error messages are cleared and I get the right answer. And I noticed the focus didn't get set correctly for when I had the first one wrong, it put the focus on the second field, and that's because I had the wrong number there. Okay, so that's it. That's using cascading or nested if statements to validate 3 fields in a form.